Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson, a World Alternative Media here. And years ago when I started in media, there were four guys that really stood out to me, that really inspired me to do what I do today. And that was people like Dan Dix from Press for Truth, Luke Rudowski from We Are Change, Dr. Ron Paul, of course, and of course, our guest today, Adam Kokesh. Adam, if you haven't heard of him before, which I doubt in the independent media world, but he hosted Adam versus the Man, had a show on Russia Today, is the author of the book Freedom. He is a veteran. He is one of the ballsiest activists I've ever seen, and he kind of woke me up to the message of voluntarism many years ago, and I'm really proud to introduce him to you guys. So thank you very much for joining us, Adam.
Hey, my pleasure, Josh. And that's like a really incredible intro because to me, that's the best kind of feedback. For a lot of activists, we work really hard and put a lot of emotional effort and invest a lot of time and energy into what we do. And I don't consider it work. I'm past that. I love it. I get to play all day being an activist. But the satisfaction that I get comes from hearing people like you say that my activism has changed your worldview, and really that's what it's all about. That's how we create a better world, is waking people up to a more empowering way of seeing humanity and this experience that is life. And I really appreciate that you're open to sharing that, because a lot of people kind of forget what gets them to where they are intellectually or spiritually or in their worldview specifically. And I'm at this point now with my activism where I get to hear this all the time, and it is just manifesting the world into existence that I want to see, and I'm really glad to have you be a part of that.
And absolutely, when it comes down to voluntarism, it all comes down to the individual and being the change you wish to see. As worn out and cliche as that sentence has become, it is always true and remains to be true. And I think it's so important to carry on your message to other people and let it build like a web. As I think the Freemasons say, weaving spiders come not here, and we are the weaving spiders. And I love the work you do, Adam. Before we get into politics or the lack thereof, I'd like to ask you a few personal questions about your development as an anarchist and as a media personality. Can you tell us about the moment you realized you weren't a minarchist, but actually an anarchist?
Well, when you put it in those terms, we have to be careful to define these things as well. And so if I'm going to accept the label anarchist, I have to be very careful to say anarcho-capitalist or voluntarist or libertarian. And it's important because the word is so ineffective really at communicating what we're talking about, which is really establishing a world of harmony and peace and nonviolence. But by the definition of the word no rulers, or a state of no rulers, then yes, certainly it's fair to apply the word anarchist here. And I was just at a Libertarian Party presidential debate in Las Vegas and endorsed John Mcafee, by the way. And it was really amazing to hear from a lot of people there. I love going to events like this now where people come up and recognize me and say hi and thank me for my work. It's it's an amazing experience, and this is a growing movement. So this is happening and happening more and more. And it's what a lot of people were telling me is that they appreciate about my work is how I've changed and how I've evolved. And I think that's an important part of my message, is to be open to change, not I'm right, you're wrong. And to have gone through that evolution in such a powerful way myself, like you said, weaving spiders. I don't think that's. I don't think you even need to go to a metaphor like that. That's it. This is just a period of awareness raising for humanity on this ethics message of freedom that's based on that self ownership, and it's a convergence. Lots of people are going through this transformation that I went through, and as you know, it started as a member of Iraq Veterans Against the War, being an angry anti-war veteran, and then going to running for office, then going to media production, then going to activism, but also in that time progressing from, well, I don't like being told what to do, and I'm not going to be a Republican or Democrat because that's lame, to, wow, now I actually understand what libertarian means. And that took me 10 years, and I really am resentful. And I don't use that term lightly, and I'd like to say that it's something that doesn't exist. But I do have a sense of resentment that as a kid, as a high school kid who said, I want to be a libertarian because leave me alone, that I was told libertarian meant socially liberal, fiscally conservative. And that's not what it means. It's about philosophy and principle and ethics and self-ownership and the non-aggression principle, and this idea that the only ethical society is one that doesn't condone hitting people and taking their stuff, whether you call it government or the mafia or a gang or a petty criminal. It's all the same standard of ethics we're talking about violating here, and embracing it now is just an amazing way that humanity is moving forward. So I feel like I've become, for a lot of people, I don't want to say a leader, because this movement is really about embracing self-leadership, but someone, maybe a guide in that process for a lot of people. And there was a turning point for me. And when I say wake up, you know, it's a very imprecise metaphor to describe what we're talking about, but a lot of people use it. It's very compelling. Waking up can mean when you start thinking differently or when you fully embrace a different worldview. And I think it's more about fully embracing a different worldview. And there was a point for me, and it was reading Ethics of Liberty by Murray Rothbard that really solidified that for me. I know for a lot of people, it's watching my YouTube videos, you know, and there are people who have told me they've just spent a week binge watching Adam versus the Man and have embraced a different worldview, and that's awesome. And I want to provide more efficient means to wake people up. I always want to accelerate this process and grow the movement into the next demographic, which is, of course, why I wrote the book that I did, Freedom. I'm jumping ahead here, right? We're this is the part where I go, and thefreedomline.com is where you get this amazing piece of literature that will wake everyone up. Anyway, back to you, Josh.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Well, I've seen basically, I think, every single one of your videos.
No, that's not possible, and that's not a good idea. Like, you shouldn't have to, you know? But I appreciate that. Well, I mean, and it's impossible because I've put up a lot of crap on the internet that I know you haven't seen, unless you're like, you really have no life. No, I've made a lot of mistakes. I made a lot of crappy videos that I put up and took down, and I still have like 2,000.
I have seen you getting drunk with, I believe it was Libertarian Girl, so maybe that wasn't the best video, but I have seen most of them. And, you know, the reason I say that, though, the reason for that, well, the reason for that is because I really take inspiration from what you do, because I want to be agent of change, with lack of a better word, as you are, in the way that you are, in order to get people's awareness up to the point where, you know, people are inspired enough to do things themselves. Because, of course, what we are doing here, we're just messengers. We're not here to get famous. We're not here to get, you know, a whole bunch of money, or otherwise we wouldn't be doing this. But we're doing this because we're trying to spread information and the message of liberty.
Yeah, no, and you can tell when, well, you know, I want to point out something here in light of that is very important here, because there's no such thing as altruism. I really believe this is an important concept, that, you know, if you believe in emotional freedom, that you control your mind and your thoughts and your actions and your attitude and your outlook, and I wholeheartely believe that, and I get that a lot from nonviolent communication. I think it's a very important practice for people to understand. And when you understand that you can only control your own thoughts and emotions, this idea of doing something for the good of someone else is rephrased in a beautiful way in your head, that is not like, that takes away the guilt and the shame and the emotional manipulation and the selflessness that is always with an expectation of some kind of repayment. But that's not it. I do what I do as an activist for purely selfish reasons. And I think, if anything, it's not that selfish to want a big pile of money. It's not that selfish to want that for your family. I'm the one who's really, really, really selfish. I want to bend the world to my vision, because I'm confident that it's going to make everyone happier and more harmonious and productive. And that's the world that I want to live in. I don't want to live in a world where anyone suffers. I'm not doing it for someone. I do it because I want them to be empowered. I want them to be happy and healthy and enjoy the life that I've been fortunate enough to enjoy thus far in my time on Earth. And that it's so much more empowering to see it that way, and not play into this really archaic game of emotional manipulation and selflessness and virtue signaling and trying to beat your chest about it. And instead you get to embrace, and this has been not an obvious, easy, automatic part of my process, but you get to share from a place of beauty and abundance rather than, of sacrifice. It's not about sacrifice. It's about being more productive and having more abundance.
Absolutely. Well, my view of anarchy, of course, is far different than the leftist ideal of still collectivism versus us more individualistic people. My view of anarchy isn't necessarily no government, but the option to opt out of government and opt out of a society that we don't agree with and a collective we don't agree with, to be able to be a sovereign individual and not part of a state, not part of the immoral act of a state and the force. And I wanted to get your thoughts on what exactly do you define anarcho-capitalism as? Like, what is your personal, definition of what anarcho-capitalism is?
I'm really glad that you're asking this in terms of definitions. I'm not trying to avoid the question, but I want to go back first to what you're suggesting here, which is that you can have a society where government is optional. And at the moment that government becomes optional, it is no longer government. And I think that's really important to define, because a lot of people don't really bother to point out. I know you're already on the same page here in terms of understanding, but people don't bother to point out what defines the state. So in the world that you describe, to say that you're different, no, like that's the same thing, but I would just think you're using the word wrong, and that's a really important thing to understand, because if you can opt out of government, then it's a service provider. It might be a totalitarian, really crappy contract, kind of like modern corporation of a service provider, and you get to choose to do that. But the moment you are able to opt out entirely, then it's not a government. So for me, to answer your question, anarcho-capitalism is voluntarism. By the definition of the word anarcho-capitalism, it's a state when there are no rulers, but because it's capitalism, the idea of ownership of the means of production is respected. So this is where, Murray Rothbard, who coined the term anarcho-capitalism, it does strike me as a little bit frustrating that he took like the least two popular and most misunderstood words possible to describe what we're talking about and put them together, because you could say all we're talking about is anarchism. The word by itself describes it, and that there are no rulers. We own ourselves, we rule ourselves. Cool. But he had to add capitalism to it. He didn't even just try to redefine anarchy. He took capitalism. Now, capitalism means the same exact thing. It's just that we apply it wrong. Capitalism is simply a system, an economic system based on ownership of the means of production. Here's the thing. Everything is economics. Every exchange of value is essentially an economic exchange, whether it's time and attention or widgets and dollars. It is an exchange of value as long as it is voluntary. And the ultimate means of production is not a factory or a tool or an engine, but the individual human being, and you own yourself. That is the most important thing. So what is the measurement of production? Essentially, it's human happiness, but you get to decide what it is for yourself. It's definitely not dollars or widgets. So there's my comprehensive answer to your question.
Yeah, well, sure. Well, I just wanted to ask you, because you mentioned that you were at the Libertarian Party debate last night and that you endorsed John Mcafee. I understand the idea of trying to push someone forward that will decrease government exponentially versus someone who won't. But of course, I've been inundated with messages because people know I'm interviewing you today. Ask Adam why. Why is he endorsing John Mcafee? So could you go into that from the position of an anarcho-capitalist?
Yeah, well, I believe that John Mcafee is philosophically, if not perfectly, very closely aligned. And I think it's important to point out that a lot of us who embrace this ethical message come to different conclusions about how to achieve a society based on that ideal, both in terms of activism, in terms of institutional change, And I really have, a line that I draw about, is someone grounded in this concept of ethics and morality, and, do they come from a point of principle in establishing their political positions? And, this was a really hard decision for me because I have great relationships with all three other, even if you go to the next tier to Daryl Perry, relationships with the other candidates. Daryl Perry and I go back to Porkfest from, I think, 5-6 years ago. And he's actually the one with the platform closest to what I think is the only appropriate platform for voluntarists to run on, which is abolition. I'm simply not. I think I want someone who's going to organize a more vigorous campaign than him. Then you have Austin Petersen, and I go back as friends with him to 2007 when he was organizing volunteers for the Libertarian Party back in D.C. I am really impressed with the campaign he's put together. I think we want someone who's going to speak a little more from the philosophy and from principle and really grab people and wake people up than that. Gary Johnson, dude, I mean, I go back to when I was in New Mexico and he was governor, and then I ran for Congress and he supported me in that. I endorsed him in 2012. I was, a happy supporter of Gary Johnson then. And I think that it's really, and I've talked about this, and as much as I love him, and his resume is incredible. Really, two-term governor who vetoed more bills in that time than all other 49 governors combined. I know it's a testament to the incompetence of the New Mexico State Legislature as much as anything, and I would know as someone who's lived there. But Gary Johnson's integrity and intent is unimpeachable. I want to see still a candidate who's going to do better in taking advantage of this historic opportunity that we have in 2016 to wake people up by jumping on the national platform that the presidential election represents. And John Mcafee is the candidate who's going to do that.
Well, and I understand where you're coming from on that. And of course, one of the big things isn't necessarily to get elected, but to spread that information, because the likelihood, unfortunately, because of this ridiculous paradigm that we're living under, where people are just brainwashed by media to look at the two Pepsi and Coke, parties. It's very unlikely, unfortunately, because of, and including people like myself, just saying that it's unlikely is a big part of that too, unfortunately. But I mean, the fact is, but I also look at people like Gary Johnson, who I have a lot of respect for too. But at the same time, I mean, even he is talking about forcing businesses to, paint or draw certain pictures on cakes, because it's politically correct. I have a hard time adjusting to believing in any government.
Yeah, well, that's why I really have a hard time supporting Gary Johnson when there is someone like John Mcafee who takes a much more philosophical approach than he does.
Yeah. No, I totally get where you're coming from on that, and I felt the same about Dr. Ron Paul, because while I'm against government, it is a great feeling to know that it's not just the lesser of the evils, but the lesser of evil completely, no evil involved, and that someone just wants to bring freedom back to the individual. And of course, we're not going to get that with people like Donald Trump. And now I've had a lot of respect for Christopher Cantwell, but along with so many other so-called voluntarists and libertarians, have taken an absolute statist approach to this election due to a cult of personality, just like the Democrats did in 2008 and again in 2012. Why do you think so many people who usually seem quite aware of the left-right paradigm are falling for Trump this election? Libertarian for Trump makes no sense. He's not even a minarchist.
I'll tell you why. I feel like I have a pretty good theory here from the limited data set that I have in front of me and the extensive anecdotal data set I have about these various players within the freedom movement. If you want to say they're still part of the freedom movement, but there are two phenomena at play in my theory, and one is that there are a lot of people out there calling themselves libertarian who are Gary Johnson and Austin Petersen type libertarians. And Gary Johnson, Petersen has some philosophy that he speaks from, but Gary Johnson really is a well-intentioned, libertarian-leaning moderate. And I don't have a problem with himself calling himself a libertarian. I think that's great. I think that expands the definition. I think it makes it more inclusive, brings more people in, and that's a good thing. But when we look at the movement, if we count people like that, we have to understand that they're not really there in terms of understanding the message, in terms of understanding ethics and morality and the philosophy that leads you to the conclusion that you should leave people alone and respect their rights and so on. So there's that. And the funny thing with some people like Cantwell, he's actually quite brilliant. I respect his horsepower, and that, you know, he's done a lot of writing that's been very powerful and very insightful. And I do think he was there. So I don't think he really qualifies as part of this phenomenon, but he does qualify as part of the second phenomenon that's important. And these two phenomena interact and contribute. But the second one is the psychological appeal that Donald Trump has. And this is nothing new. I'm not the first to talk about this or notice this, and I don't think I'm even an expert on it. But in terms of how it applies to those that you mentioned, who you mentioned within the freedom movement, the psychological appeal of an alpha male, of someone who doesn't apologize, of someone who stands up for the white race or Western civilization, who in a very, very conservative way, and this is really interesting because he is rather liberal in his positions. I mean, far and away of all the Republican candidates, you know, on the other side of the left-right spectrum by any definitions. And the appeal, though, was to a conservative or maybe crude version of masculinity that has a distinct appeal to especially men, but people of you know, both genders, but especially men who feel insecure, beaten down, who rely on a collectivist identity as white people or as members of Western civilization. And this is why you see the anti-Mexican sentiment, the anti-Islam, Arab, Muslim sentiment. And I don't want to make blanket statements. I want to be very careful in couching this. I'm pointing out general trends. I'm not accusing everyone of anything. But the general psychological appeal for people like that is, you know, really, really scary that it can have that. And it makes it all the more important for me, and I included this in the book, Freedom, that there's a message, that the implications, I should say, of embracing this philosophical, ethical approach to personal empowerment and how that defeats insecurity, because insecurity creates room for fear, which creates room for manipulation. And I think that we've seen even people who can say that they get this intellectually can be swayed by that kind of sad psychological appeal. And I think it's really exciting when you step back to see that despite this revelation, thanks to Donald Trump's candidacy, we are actually progressing a lot in this count, and people are becoming a lot more enlightened and empowered and less susceptible to that kind of manipulation.
Yeah, of course, Donald Trump is no champion for liberty. He does say some interesting stuff, but I mean, they consider Bernie Sanders anti-establishment too, and he is in no way talking about smaller government. I mean, he's actually going full communism in some ways. So you know, if a lot of people are. Oh, go ahead.
About Donald Trump, as an individual, I like him. I have a lot of respect for him. I am subject to the same emotional appeals in a sense that I like seeing someone doing something empowering and you know, moving about the world in a positive way. Obviously, he's spreading a lot of negativity and a lot of things bad with that. But what we can celebrate as libertarians looking at Donald Trump is that as a populist candidate, it is now populist to challenge a lot of these, you know, I don't know, what were the things you mentioned? Maybe they're not that big a deal, but, you know, challenging some of the 9/11 narrative, talking about people being responsible for that. Some of the things that he said that are distinctly anti-establishment positions. You know, he's not really an anti-establishment candidate, but we can celebrate that we have shifted the market.
Yeah, but at the same time, I would call it almost like a CIA limited hangout where it's divide and conquer and deceive at the same time, you know?
HRC, it's an HRC limited hangout. That's Hillary Rodham Clinton. He was put there to be the least popular possible nominee of the Republican Party to guarantee that Hillary would win. Just another theory.
And people say, well, the media is against him, but they only talk about him all day. And if you consider the fact that the media was also against Newt Gingrich, that doesn't mean he's anti-establishment when he ran. Yeah. But I know we are kind of running out of time here. There's so much I'd like to ask you, but I wanted to make sure to get this in. Can you tell everyone about your book, Freedom, where they can find it, and why the TSA is so attracted to it?
Well, Freedom is the book that I started writing while I was in jail. And it occurred to me that of all of the attempts to create the ultimate red pill, we needed an update. We needed one that was in line with all of the lessons that we've learned in the last decade or so of growing this movement, of how to reach people, how to create an intellectual body of work that is easy to understand but presents a comprehensive, complete worldview without any opinion or judgment or belittling or wishful thinking or even just casual language, but is instead extremely precise and irrefutable in a way that everyone can stand behind it, but also includes, like I mentioned earlier, the aspects of personal freedom that are so important to living by these values of self-empowerment, of respecting your own individual will and how you live, and how we get there, and how technology is forwarding us towards a voluntary society and accelerating it, and the incredible acceleration of the human experience that we're getting to live through right now. So it's just 100 pages. It's free in every digital format possible, including as an audiobook. We have translations in Chinese and Korean and Turkish and more coming, and you can get it almost at cost. We sell them as inexpensively as possible, in bulk as well on our website. We have over 1.5 million downloads. We just got our 4th printing of another 30,000 books, and it is just incredible to see how this tool that I had a lot of help in creating is something that the movement needed and the market is showing a demand for, and it gives me all the more hope that people are waking up and looking for ways to spread this awareness and share this beautiful message with other people. So thefreedomline.com, thefreedomline.com, that's my website. You can find my YouTube channel there, all my social media, and most importantly, the book Freedom for free.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Adam Kokesh. We'll have to talk again, and I do urge everyone to check out the Freedom Online. It's incredible. If you haven't looked at some of Adam's on the street videos as well, his streeter videos, absolutely astonishing, the kind of work that this man does to bring awareness to the public. And I can't thank you enough, and we will be talking soon. So everyone else out there, you can check us out on Facebook, subscribe below, find us at worldalternativemedia.com, and we'll be bringing you much more from Wham! Deep inside Redcoat territory up here in Canada. See you guys next time.
Thank you.